Well, while Jim's pulling up the presentation, I just wanted to say I'm thrilled to be here. It's an exciting time to be involved in transportation. There's just so much change. The other speakers have talked about what's coming ahead, and I'm in a fortunate position at SANDAG to be able to focus most of my attention on the future. My responsibilities include operations management for SANDAG's toll program, as well as what we talked about with the iCommute program, really trying to help shift trips out of the single occupant vehicle into carpools, van pools, transit, bicycling, and walking. So I'm excited to be able to share some things that we've been observing as a team. And so if we could go to the next slide, there's just a few trends that we've been observing that I thought would be interesting just to chat about, and then perhaps there could be some Q&A that would help us get a better understanding about how these trends are going to start to affect the way we think about transportation, and more importantly, the way we can behave around transportation. Next slide. So this is a little complicated slide, but when we talk about the introduction of new technologies, it's really important to consider the rate of adoption, or the speed at which a technology is introduced into the marketplace, and the time it takes for that technology to actually penetrate the market at significant rate to actually start to make a difference. And historically, when we look at the left of this slide, and I apologize that the type is a little bit small, but I'll try to point out for you the difference between evolutionary technology that enters the market and then very slowly increases its market rate penetration over time, like the household stove, which took 70 years from the time it was introduced to where it achieved 90% market penetration, or the car, introduced in the early 1900s, taking more than 75 years before it actually reached market penetration. At the right side of the slide, we see the introduction of some new consumer electronics, the cell phone, the smartphone, the tablet. From the time that they were introduced to the time they reached 90% penetration in the market was only 13 years. These are revolutionary market introductions and revolutionary transformations. These technologies were more evolutionary. So it's just some context as we begin to think about emerging technologies and the rate at which they begin to make a difference. Next slide. One of the trends that I think has the most revolutionary potential is one that's already demonstrating some great potential to disrupt the transportation industry, is the trend towards shared use mobility. Ride-source companies like Lyft and Uber have introduced really a game-changing service. And for me, the fascinating thing about this is that these services were introduced through smartphone applications. Lyft and Uber don't own any of the vehicles that are used to provide mobility options. And so these services, to me, are disrupting not only taxis, but in fact it's leading the auto manufacturers, as Angus indicated, to really rethink their entire business models. So as an example, last year, Ford's CEO, Mark Fields, made a really bold statement about the future of Ford, and essentially saying, we're no longer an auto manufacturer. We're really a mobility as a service provider. And the evidence now can be seen in the investments that Ford is making. They purchased a company called Bridge, made a big investment there. That's an on-demand shuttle service. Really different from simply making a car. They're actually operating a multi-passenger shuttle. They've invested in a bike share service. The list goes on. In fact, it's not limited to Ford. General Motors has made a substantial investment in Lyft. BMW, Toyota, Daimler, the list goes on. They're all making these strategic investments, really begin to rethink their whole business model, transforming from bending sheet metal to actually offering on-demand mobility and all the underlying technology and services that enable people to have personal mobility on demand. To me, that's very revolutionary. Next slide. Alternative powertrains are a trend that appear to be entering the marketplace on a much more evolutionary path, despite the offers of state and federal subsidies. But I think with the promise, as Angus indicated, that there's a wider selection of vehicles like Chevy's new Bolt, and then the new Tesla Model 3. These I think are going to start to lead to some increasingly large numbers over time. And I think what's going to be happening now is with this improved affordability, the expectation will be see more market penetration and ultimately reduce tailpipe emissions as this adoption increases. But it's not just about the EVs themselves, it's about the underlying services that enable the EVs to collect the energy that they need to move forward. And locally, Qualcomm here in San Diego has been actively developing wireless charging through their Halo program. So the idea of having to stop and actually plug your vehicle in to get the charge is not necessarily the way it's going to be in the near future. In fact, Qualcomm's been demonstrating over in England and even locally the use of this wireless charging platform. Today, you've actually have to have the car parked in over the charging pad for a few minutes, but already there's an electric bus that is demonstrating its ability to make its rounds using several of these wireless charging stations. Never really have to stop for more than just a few seconds in order to be able to get this inductive charge wirelessly and continue its trip. Really convenient, no need to get out of the vehicle, no need to have a plug, no need to forget the plug and drive away. And, for me, that's an evolutionary change that has the potential to be quite transformative. Next slide. Autonomous technology may be the most disruptive of all technologies, at least in my limited experience. And for me, the focus as I've been observing it now is primarily on software. The hardware piece seems to be largely resolved by the auto manufacturers, and it's really coming down to a very complicated set of algorithms, all based on artificial intelligence and the ability to learn. And this is, I think, the real benefit now is that we've got this kind of incremental improvement all focused on improving safety, and really not just for the motorists. We've talked a little about bicycling. For me, I consider myself a person who bikes. I tend to try to choose walking when I can, and I think that going forward, one of the great potentials that autonomous technology offers is to enable us to embrace and implement a complete streets vision. And I think the reason that happens is we begin to take the humans, those who make the mistakes behind the wheel, out of the equation. And for me, there's no better change than no drunk driving, because that to me is one of the biggest causes of many of the most fatal accidents. And really, safety is the primary reason behind all the vehicle manufacturers and why they're engaged so passionately with vehicle autonomy. They see the long-term benefit from reducing these incidents, and they also recognize the transformation for families who, of the 30,000 or more annual victims, will potentially be saved as a result of a high penetration of autonomous vehicles. So that, for me, is the promise of hope, that families won't be experiencing tragedy as we do today on a scale that's really quite terrible. Another transformation from the improved safety is the fact that the structural components that make up a substantial portion of the size of the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle, and the cost of the vehicle, and that's highlighted here with some of these yellow structural members here, those are dedicated to the vehicle to help it survive a crash. And if you think on the future forward, and I'm going to show some slides coming up next about where the auto manufacturers see the vehicles beginning to change, because not only do you get better fuel economy when you reduce the weight, but the next slide begins to show that you can begin to reimagine what a vehicle might look like. So in the lower corner here, of course, you've probably seen the Google vehicle. Like the rest of these that I'm showing here, these are neighborhood electric vehicles. This is really the newest class of vehicle that's been introduced and permitted in the United States in the last 20 years. And these neighborhood electric vehicles, you've possibly seen vehicles like this around. They travel 25 miles an hour or less. That's the top speed. And these vehicles really enable us to begin to rethink what a vehicle is. We've got this slow-speed shuttle. I think Ava showed a picture of the Navia vehicle that's been demonstrated in Las Vegas and other parts of the world. Toyota has been pilot testing what they call the iRoad. It's a three-wheel personal electric vehicle. It comes in a single passenger form like this model shows, and a double passenger form, and a quad. And they've been pilot testing these over in Grenoble, France, all electric, as well as pilot testing these in in Tokyo. And these lighter, smaller vehicles now begin to help us to rethink urban form. And the way that we allocate public right-of-way, it's very precious. There's always been, at least in the last years, a battle about which mode is the most important mode, which mode gets the most space. And I think as we begin to look ahead and begin to see the vision that some of the auto manufacturers are beginning to articulate, I can imagine a future in the not too distant where allocating this precious space actually becomes way more equitable, and I think it helps us establish much more of a complete streets precedent around all these modes. Next slide. Another trend is the vehicles are being connected, and this is a move that's been undertaken by the federal government. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration just released some statements, just as the outgoing administration had termed out, but they've now begun to set the course for the auto manufacturers that would ultimately result in a mandate that all new vehicles beginning in 2019 will be required to be able to transmit and receive a basic safety message, and that's a game changer as well. This has the potential, as cars are introduced into the marketplace, to be an evolutionary change over time. And I think what happens when we see the capabilities of communicating vehicle to vehicle, and vehicle to roadside, and vehicle to pedestrian, and vehicle to bicyclist, now starts to also increase the level of potential when it comes to safety, as well as that ability to be able to navigate and allocate space in a lot more equitable way. And I think that that not only provides the potential for improvements in operational efficiency of our roadways and potential fuel savings, but I think, as I've mentioned now with these last three trends, I think it all contributes towards a complete streets implementation. With this connected vehicle and with vehicle autonomy, there's another big trend that's happening, and that's all around data management and analytics. Recently, Intel had forecast that the autonomous vehicle alone is going to be generating about 4 terabytes of data every day. And that's a massive, it's like a tsunami of data coming. And with this data comes the requirement for new data management solutions and analytics tools that are going to help to seek to solve some of the problems around improving vehicle efficiency, helping to improve operations. But with this tsunami of data comes a lot of real concerns about privacy, as well as data ownership and snooping. And these concerns are, I think, maybe one of the most serious impediments to the deployments of autonomous vehicles, and may keep them more on an evolutionary than revolutionary market. I think is maybe one of the biggest challenges for the federal, state, and regional government to begin to step in and to provide some leadership when it comes to helping to make the public aware about the benefits of vehicle autonomy, and also to be able to have honest and open discussions about how we can protect ourselves, how we can secure our freedom without being compromised. And this is a big issue that I think very few right now are really focusing on, because all the hype is around the technology. But underlying the technology, a very critical point that I think we can't overlook. And then connected to that is really another side of the coin, and that's all around cybersecurity. This is another trend that we're observing, and San Diego really is one of the leaders when it comes to cybersecurity firms involved in research and development, and we're very fortunate. Recently, the San Diego region was selected out of 60 applicants nationwide to be designated as an autonomous vehicle proving ground, only one of 10 around the country. And we think in part the reason that our application was viewed so favorably was because of the local talent, both on the wireless as well as the cybersecurity side. And as I mentioned, one of the potentially largest impediments to autonomous vehicle market penetration, I think, is going to be public acceptance, rooted around safety and moreover around personal privacy and data protection. And so this whole idea around cybersecurity is inextricably linked to the discussion around data and around autonomy and around connected. And I think it's got to be addressed. Otherwise, all the benefits that we hear about from the manufacturers and think about as transportation planners that come from autonomous and connected vehicles, I don't know if they're going to be realized without resolving this problem. So the last slide, where are all these trends pointing to? And what can we possibly do to be able to harness the benefits that these technologies seem to offer in a way that leads to a more sustainable, a more equitable, and a more accessible transportation system? And I think that's the big question. And it's something that we're giving serious thought to and applying some planning activity to in an attempt to understand how our region can begin to take a lead. I mentioned the autonomous vehicle proving ground is, I think, one step towards helping to establish some precedent, focus some resources, focus the public's attention on autonomous vehicles. But we also conduct long-range planning at SANDAG, and in our last couple of long-range plans, the most recent one, most notably, we began exploring an idea that I think helps to bring together some of these technologies, not all of them, and with the infusion of some state and federal grant funds, we've been able to elaborate now more specifically on this concept of a mobility hub, where we can begin to think about areas where we've got existing transit services and a fairly mixed use of land uses nearby, and begin to exploit the benefits and the potential that these transit-oriented areas can begin to offer in terms of helping to establish commerce, residency, improved mobility. And so the idea here is to be able to take some of these emerging technologies and apply them in a new way and think about how they can help us achieve our interests for mobility, economy, and sustainability. So with that, thank you all.